The marketplace in Kumasi bustled with life, a vibrant explosion of colors and scents. Women draped in rich Kente fabrics called out their wares, their voices rising above the hum of conversation. The air carried the mingling aromas of roasted plantain, grilled fish, and fragrant spices. Somewhere in the distance, the steady beat of drums pulsed through the air, adding rhythm to the lively scene. Anaisi moved through the crowd with effortless grace, her wide hips swaying beneath the folds of her wrapper. Her dark skin glowed under the sunlight, her eyes shining with confidence as she examined a row of ripe tomatoes. She reached for a few, haggling playfully with an old woman selling smoked fish. Just as she handed over her coins, she shifted her basket, unaware of a mango rolling toward her feet. A deep, steady voice cut through the noise. "Careful! You almost dropped your basket." Startled, she turned and met the gaze of a stranger. ElIkem stood before her, tall and striking, his eyes warm with quiet amusement. His simple yet well-kept smoke bore the markings of his heritage, and his confident stance spoke of a man who knew his worth. Anaisi tilted her head, a smile ghosting her lips. "Thank you. Are you new here?" ElIkem nodded. "Yes, I arrived yesterday. I came for trade, but I found something more interesting than business." She raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in her gaze. "And what could be more interesting than business?" His grin deepened. "Meeting someone like you." She laughed softly, a sound that sent a thrill through him. For a moment, the bustling market faded into the background, leaving only the two of them standing in the midst of something unspoken. Anaisi adjusted the cloth over her shoulder, her fingers brushing the fabric absent-mindedly. "Well," she said, "since you're new here, you should know that flattery alone won't get you good deals in this market. You need skill." ElIkem's eyes sparkled. "Then perhaps I need a guide. Would you show me?" She hesitated, then nodded, the smallest smile tugging at her lips. As they wove through the market together, their words intertwined like the intricate patterns of woven kente. And for a brief moment, the barriers between their tribes, their histories written in blood, mattered less than the connection sparking between them. The riverbank had become their secret haven, a place where time slowed and the world beyond seemed distant. Weeks had passed since their first meeting, and Anaisi and ElIkem had fallen into a rhythm, walking side by side, sharing their thoughts and dreams as the water murmured its quiet song. ElIkem bent to pick up a smooth stone, weighing it in his palm before tossing it into the river. "Back in my village, my father always said love should be patient, like the river carving its path through the land. But sometimes love moves faster, like rain rushing to meet the earth." Anaisi smiled, tracing a finger along the edge of a wrapper. "And what kind of love do you think ours is?" He turned to her, his voice softer. "The kind that defies the mountains in its way." Her breath hitched. She had never met a man who spoke like ElIkem, who saw beyond what was expected of them. She reached for a stone and tossed it into the river, watching as the ripples spread outward, uncertain yet inevitable. "My father will never allow me to marry an Everman," she admitted. "He believes our people should not mix. He says our histories are written in blood." ElIkem's jaw tightened. "But love is not about tribes. It is about two hearts finding each other." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and firm. She did not pull away. Instead, she let herself sink into the quiet strength he offered. The world around them faded, the rustling leaves, the whispering water, until there was only the space between them. ElIkem lifted a hand, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek, his voice barely above a whisper. held the weight of an unspoken promise. You are more than just an Ashanti woman. You are a woman with her own heart, her own choices, and I love you for that. Nanaisi's breath caught. Before she could respond, ElIkem leaned in and pressed a soft lingering kiss against her forehead. She closed her eyes, letting herself savor the moment, the warmth of him, the safety in his presence. Slowly, she opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. Something in her chest shifted, releasing the fear she had clung to for so long. She reached out, brushing her fingers along the roughness of his jaw. Then, with a deep breath, she closed a space between them and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was slow, deliberate, filled with all the things they had yet to say. The setting sun bathed them in golden light, sealing their love in the embrace of the evening sky. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his, her heart beating wildly. Maybe love is worth the fight. ElIkem's arms tightened around her, as if to promise that no matter what came next, he would fight for them. And as the last light of day melted into the horizon, Anaisi let herself believe that love might just be strong enough to rewrite the past. The weight of tradition hung heavy in the air as Nanaisi stood before her father, Nana Kwame Poku, seated on his carved stool, regarded her with a mixture of disappointment and fury. The gathered elders murmured among themselves, the tension in the room as thick as smoke. Is it true, Nanaisi? Her father's voice was cold, unwavering. Have you given your heart to an everyman? Nanaisi lifted her chin, her paws hammering in her ears. Yes, father, I love ElIkem. A stunned silence filled the room before her younger brother. Kwabena stepped forward, his face twisted with disbelief. Esi, do you not understand what you are doing? The Ashanti and the Ebe have never mixed. Her father's voice boomed. You will marry Kofi Boateng. That is final. Her hands trembled, but she stood firm. I cannot. My heart belongs to ElIkem. The room erupted in whispers, but her father's next words cut through them like a blade. If you live to be with him, you are no longer my daughter. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She looked at her mother, who wiped at her own eyes but said nothing. Taking a deep breath, Nanaisi straightened her shoulders. Then I will leave. Her father's voice was stern, but as she turned away, she thought she caught the smallest flicker of sorrow in his gaze. She did not look back. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the winding road outside the village. The rustling of leaves mingled with the rhythmic chirping of crickets, and fireflies blinked in and out of sight like tiny spirits guiding the way. A gentle breeze whispered through the trees, their branches swaying and casting shifting shadows upon the ground. Nanaisi moved swiftly, her simple cloak billowing around her. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of what she was leaving behind. Her feet barely seemed to touch the earth as she approached the meeting place, each step taking her further from the only life she had ever known. Yet, even as uncertainty gnawed at her, she knew deep inside that she was not running away. She was running towards something far greater. Love. Freedom. Ahead, a lone figure stood beside a waiting horse. ElIkem's face, half lit by the moon's glow, was a mixture of relief and urgency. His deep eyes locked onto hers, silently searching for certainty. She nodded, breathless. Her lips parted as she fought to steady herself against the rush of adrenaline surging through her veins. You came, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the night's stillness. I could not stay, she murmured back. My love for you is stronger than my fear. ElIkem reached out, his fingers wrapping around hers, strong and steady. For a long moment, they stood in the hush of the night, the rustling leaves and distant nocturnal sounds, the only witnesses to their silent vows. Anaisi closed her eyes and let the warmth of his hand ground her. This was where she belonged. Without hesitation, he helped her onto the horse, his hands lingering at her waist a fraction longer than necessary, as though anchoring her to him. She gripped his shoulders, steadying herself as she swung up behind her. His arms encircled her, holding the reins. Yet she felt more than just their practical grip. There was a quiet promise in his embrace, a vow that, no matter what lay ahead, he would never let her go. As the horse began its steady pace forward, the wind rushed against Nanaisi's face, cool and crisp with the scent of the forest. Behind them, the village lights dimmed, swallowed by the night, each flickering ember a past memory fading into the dark. She pressed herself against ElIkem, feeling the rhythmic movement of his breath, the silent reassurance of his presence. The road ahead stretched into the unknown, filled with both peril and possibility. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. ElIkem's voice was barely a whisper in her ear. No matter where we go, I will protect you. We'll build a life together. She smiled softly, resting her head against him. As long as we are together, I am home. And so they rode into the night, bound not by duty or tradition, but by a love strong enough to challenge fate itself. A village nestled between rolling green hills awoke with a golden touch of the rising sun. Simple huts dotted the landscape, their thatched roofs glowing in the morning light. Birds sang in the trees, their melodies blending with the rhythmic pounding of foot beneath the shade of large trees. Laughter rang out as children chased one another through narrow pathways, while men prepared for the day's fishing and farming. At the edge of the village, two weary travelers arrived, ElIkem and Nanaisi. Their journey had been long, but their spirits held fast to hope. As they approached, a few villagers paused their work, their eyes filled with curiosity and whispers passing between them. ElIkem dismounted first, his strong hands reaching to help Nanaisi down from the horse with quiet reverence. "This is home," he said softly, his gaze sweeping over the familiar surroundings. Nanaisi took a deep breath, absorbing the unfamiliar yet welcoming sights. There was a warmth here, a peaceful rhythm to life that soothed the turmoil inside her. Yet beneath that comfort, uncertainty still lingered in her heart. From a nearby hut, a regal woman emerged, her presence commanding yet kind. Lines of wisdom marked her face, and her eyes, filled with knowing and love, settled upon them. "My son," she murmured, voice laced with emotion, "you have returned, and you have brought someone with you." ElIkem bowed his head respectfully before stepping forward. "Mother, this is Nanaisi. She is my heart." His mother's gaze fell upon Nanaisi, studying her in silent contemplation. The weight of tradition, of acceptance, hung between them. Then, without a word, she stepped forward and took Nanaisi's hands in hers, warmth flowing through her touch. "A woman who follows her love despite the storm is a strong woman indeed," she said to her, firm yet gentle. "You're welcome here, daughter." Nanaisi felt tears well in her eyes. The acceptance she had longed for from her own family, she now found in the eyes of this woman she had never met before. She lowered her head in deep gratitude. The villagers, having observed the exchange, began to smile. Some stepped forward, offering water and food, small gestures that made Nanaisi feel as though she belonged. She exhaled, allowing herself to relax in the warmth of their welcome. ElIkem's mother led them to their new home, a modest hut with a thatched roof and a small garden flourishing in front. Inside, the space was simple yet filled with care. Handmade baskets hung from the walls, and a woven mat lay in the center, inviting and warm. Nanaisi traced her fingers along the wooden beams, feeling the heart of the home in its careful craftsmanship. That evening, the village celebrated. A fire blazed in the center, its flickering light casting dancing shadows as the songs of drums echoed in the night. Villagers moved in joyous cycles, their laughter and song weaving together in harmony. The air was rich with the aroma of roasted fish and granite soup, comforting and familiar. Nanaisi sat beside ElIkem, her heart swelling with gratitude. As she watched the festivities, A young girl approached and gently placed a beaded necklace around her neck, a symbol of welcome and belonging. She touched the delicate beads, feeling the weight of acceptance settle into her soul. She turned to ElIkem, her voice barely above a whisper. I never imagined I could find a home so far from where I was born. He gently squeezed her hand, his voice steady and full of quiet conviction. Home is where love is, and we are exactly where we are meant to be. Above them, the stars shimmered like scattered diamonds, a silent witness to their journey. And I leaned against ElIkem, knowing that the road ahead would still hold challenges, but for now, in the embrace of warmth and acceptance, she felt at peace. Their journey had only just begun, but together they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The sun crept over the horizon, casting a golden hue over the quiet outskirts of the Ewe village. The crisp morning air carried the distant hum of village life, children's laughter, the rhythmic pounding of fufu, the soft murmur of conversation beginning anew. Near a small farm on the village's edge, Anaisi knelt beside a row of crops, her hands digging gently into the earth. The rich soil clung to her fingers as she worked, her brow damp with effort. ElIkem stood nearby, watching with admiration as she adjusted to the rigors of village life. He knew this was not the world she had grown up in, yet she adapted, her resolve unshaken. Still, he could see the strain in her muscles, the labor unfamiliar, yet approached with determination. You are learning fast, my love, he said, his voice laced with pride. Soon, the lamb will know your hands as well as it knows mine. Nanaisi wiped the sweat from her forehead, offering him a soft smile. The land is kind, she murmured, but it does not give without effort. I will not let hardship take me from your side. Just as their gazes met, a sudden commotion stirred from the village. Two men approached, a well-respected elder and a familiar figure from Nana Isi's past. Kwabena, a younger brother, walked beside the elder, his expression unreadable. The sight of him sent a ripple of uncertainty through her chest. Sister, Kwabena's voice was quiet, yet firm. You have not been forgotten. Anaise's breath caught in her throat. She had made peace with the idea that her family might never seek her out. Yet here stood her brother, a man she had once protected, now standing before her like a stranger. Kwabena, she whispered, stepping forward cautiously. What are you doing here? Did father send you? Kwabena hesitated, his gaze flickering briefly to ElIkem before answering. No, he refuses to speak your name. But mother, she has fallen ill. She calls for you in her sleep. A sharp ache settled in Nanai's chest. The mother who had watched her live in silence, the woman who had once cradled her, was now reaching for her in the only way she could. She instinctively sought ElIkem's hand, gripping it tightly, grounding herself. Your mother's love remains, even where your father's does not, ElIkem said gently. Do what your heart tells you, Essie. I will stand beside you. Her gaze shifted between ElIkem and the elder who had accompanied Kwabena. The elder nodded solemnly, his expression heavy with understanding. Family is born by more than tradition, he said. If you wish to see your mother, you must go soon. Time does not wait. Anaise's mind swelled with thoughts. To return meant stepping into the place that had once cast her out. To stay meant carrying the weight of never seeing her mother again. She looked to Kwabena, reading the unspoken hope behind his otherwise composed expression. Their father's judgment remained unyielding, but their mother's love had survived separation. Was it strong enough to mend what had been broken? She inhaled deeply, steadying herself for the path ahead. Then we leave at dawn, she said softly, her decision firm. ElIkem did not release her hand. Instead, he held it tighter, anchoring her in the certainty that she was not alone. Together, they prepared for the journey back to the place where love had once forbidden, but where fate now called her home. The dirt road twisted through the dense canopy of trees, each step forward carrying them closer to a place filled with both memories and uncertainty. The morning sun peeked through the thick foliage, casting golden light over the path. The scent of damp earth mingled with the distant aroma of fires burning in village homes, filling the air with nostalgia. Anansi rode in silence, seated in front of ElIkem on horseback, while Kobina walked a few steps ahead, leading the way. Though the journey was not long, each step felt heavier than the last. Emotions swelled within her, fear, hope, and a deep uncertainty about what lay ahead. ElIkem, sensing her unease, squeezed her hand gently. No matter what happens, we face it together. She turned her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, but what if my father does not allow me to see her? What if she does not wish to see me? Kwapna slowed his pace, glancing back at her. Mother has never stopped loving you, Essie, he said softly. Even when father forbade her from speaking your name, she would whisper prayers for you. She may not have fought for you then, but she's fighting for you now, in the only way she can. Nanaisi nodded, but the knot in her stomach remained. As they neared the village, the familiar sounds of daily life grew clearer. Women laughing as they pounded fufu, children chasing each other around huts, the rhythmic beat of a drum pulsing in the distance. Everything looked the same, yet she felt like a stranger returning to a world that had moved on without her. As they passed through the village gates, the mummies began. Villagers paused in their work, eyes widening as they recognized the daughter who had been cast out. Some whispered to one another, others averted their gaze. Nana Essie straightened her back, lifting her chin despite the weight of their stares. Kwapna led them toward the large compound at the village center, their childhood home. A young girl, wide-eyed with recognition, gasped and ran inside at the sight of them, her feet barely touching the ground as she disappeared behind the doors. Moments later, Mami Akosia emerged. Anaise's breath caught. Her mother looked frailer than she remembered, her body thinner, the lines on her face deeper, but her eyes, those same warm, knowing eyes, were filled with longing and love. Essie, my child. Mami Akosia's voice broke as she spoke. Anaisi slid off the horse, her legs trembling as she rushed forward. The moment she reached her mother, she fell into her arms, holding her tightly as though she might vanish. Tears fell freely from both women, soaking into their clothes, binding them in the unspoken words of years apart. I am here, Mama, Nanaisi whispered. I am here. Her mother's hand trembled as they spoke her hair, rocking her gently as though she were still a child. Overwhelmed by emotion, Mami Akosia simply held her, unable to say more. Behind them, ElIkem remained silent, his hand resting tightly on the hilt of his cloth belt, his presence a quiet pillar of support. He did not intrude on the moment, only watched with quiet reverence, knowing that some reunions were sacred beyond words. A figure loomed in the doorway. Nanaisi knew before she even turned who it was. Nana Kwame Poku stopped and stepped out, his presence commanding as ever, his face hardened by years of unspoken pain. The village fell silent. All eyes turned to him. He did not speak at first, only studying his daughter, the daughter who had defied him, and then the man beside her, the ever man she had chosen over tradition. You have returned, he said at last, his voice firm, yet carrying something deeper beneath the surface. Anaisi wiped her tears, standing tall. She did not cower, nor did she bow her head. She was no longer the girl who had left this place. Yes, father, she said, her voice steady. I have come to see my mother. I have come to make peace. A tense silence stretched between them. The village held its breath, waiting. Nana Kwame Poku's eyes flickered, something shifting in them, an emotion too guarded to name. Finally, he exhaled slowly and stepped aside. Then come inside, he said. Your mother needs you. A collective sigh rippled through the crowd. Anaisi nodded and, with one last glance at ElIkem, followed her father into the home she had once called her own. The journey was not over, but for the first time, she could see the path ahead. The air inside the family home was thick with the scent of burning incense. The dim candlelight casting elongated shadows along the walls, adorned with ancestral artifacts. The weight of history filled the space, pressing in on Nana Esi as she followed her father, Nana Kwame Poku, into the room. Behind her, Mami Akosia and Kwabena stood in tense silence, their expressions unreadable. She hesitated at the threshold, memories of childhood washing over her. She could almost see herself, a young girl, sitting by the father, listening intently as her father spoke of their ancestors, their honor, their sacrifices, their legacy. Now standing before him after so many years, she wondered if he still saw her as his daughter or only as the one who had defied him. "Sit, we must speak," Nana Kwame Poku commanded, his voice firm, yet controlled. Anaisi cast a glance toward ElIkem, who remained at the doorway. His presence, unwavering and strong, reassured her. Taking a steady breath, she lowered herself onto the seat across from her father, folding her hands tightly in her lap. The flickering candlelight danced between them, mirroring the unspoken tension. "You defied me, Esi," her father began, his voice carrying the weight of years of unspoken anger. "You shamed our families, our ancestors. You walked away from everything that made you an Ashanti woman." Nanaisi lifted her chin, her voice quiet but firm. "I followed my heart, father. I chose love, not betrayal." Her jaw tightened, but his gaze remained locked on hers. Across the room, Mami Akosia pressed a trembling hand to her chest, a silent plea for peace hanging between them. "And what has love given you?" Nana Kwame Poku demanded. "A place among strangers? A life in exile? Do you know the shame your absence brought upon this household?" Tears pricked Nana Esi's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I know the pain I caused you, father," she admitted, "but I also know that love does not erase who I am. I'm still your daughter. I am still Ashanti." The room fell into silence until Kwabena, shifting uneasily, finally stepped forward. His voice, though hesitant, carried conviction. "Father, the world is changing. The divisions of the past do not have to define us forever. ElIkem is not our enemy. He stands with Esi, and he always has." Nana Kwame Poku turned his sharp gaze toward ElIkem, studying him in the dim light. ElIkem did not look away. He stood with quiet dignity, his posture strong but respectful. The silence stretched between them, heavy with expectation. Finally, Nana Kwame Poku exhaled, his face unreadable. "Your mother has been ill," he said at last. "Her heart is weak. If you wish to care for her, you may stay, but do not expect my blessing. And do not ask for my forgiveness so easily. That must be earned." The words were not an embrace, but they were not rejection either. Nanaisi's heart ached, but she nodded, understanding the weight of what had been given. Beside her, Mami Akosia's eyes welled with tears. "My child, you are home now," she whispered. "That is all that matters." ElIkem stepped forward, lowering himself to one knee before Nana Kwame Poku in a gesture of deep respect. "I do not ask for your forgiveness," he said solemnly, "only for the chance to prove my love for your daughter. I will honor her as I would honor my own family." Nana Kwame Poku regarded him for a long, measured moment. Then, with a curt nod, he looked away. It was not acceptance, but it was not outright refusal either. It was something in between, a space where healing could begin. The night stretched long with conversation. Old wounds were not easily healed, but the door had been opened, and that was more than Nana Esi had dared to hope for. For the first time in years, she slept under her father's roof, not as an outcast, but as a daughter seeking reconciliation. The family compound stirred beneath the soft embrace of dawn. A faint mist lingering over the courtyard as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick foliage. Nanaisi stepped outside, inhaling deeply, the crisp morning air filling her lungs. The weight of the previous night still clung to her, but a newfound sense of hope flickered within her heart. She watched as Mami Akosua, frail yet determined, slowly tended to a small herb garden near the compound's entrance. The sight tugged at Nana Isi's heart. She walked over and knelt beside her mother, carefully reaching for the same leaf Mami Akosua was plucking. "You should not be exerting yourself, Mami," she said softly. "Let me help you." Her mother's lips curled into a faint smile, her eyes clouded with both exhaustion and affection. "These hands have known this soil for many years, my child," she murmured. "They will not stop simply because time demands it." Nanaisi lowered her gaze, gently pressing her fingertips into the earth. For a moment, silence passed between them, thick with emotions left unspoken. Then, Mami Akosua reached out, placing a withered but warm hand over hers. "Your father is a man of pride, Esi," she said quietly. "But pride is a fragile thing, and love is stronger than even the most stubborn heart. Give him time." Nanaisi swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. She was about to respond when the sound of footsteps approaching shifted her attention. Turning, she saw Kwabena and ElIkem walking side by side, engaged in quiet conversation. The sight made her breath hitch. Her brother, who had once vehemently opposed her choices, was now speaking to the man she loved. "Ashanti lands are not as fertile as the valleys of the Volta," Kwabena was saying, his tone almost casual. "But we work the soil well. Perhaps one day we will see how we do it." ElIkem nodded thoughtfully. "I would like that. Every land has its own wisdom to offer." Hope blossomed in Nana Isi's chest. This, more than anything, told her that change was possible. Her family might not fully accept ElIkem yet, but the walls that had divided them were beginning to crack, making way for something new. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Nana Kwame Poku. Wrapped in his robe, he stepped onto the veranda, his expression unreadable. The conversation ceased as all eyes turned to him. He surveyed the scene before him, his wife, his son, his daughter, and the man she had chosen. The tension was thick, but instead of turning away, he took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Esi, ElIkem, come with me." There was no hostility in his voice, but neither was there warmth. It was a command, but not a dismissal. With a nod, Nanaisi and ElIkem followed him into the main hall, where the air still hung heavy with the past night's discussion. Nana Kwame Poku settled onto his wooden stool, staring at them for a long moment before finally speaking. "A man does not change his mind overnight," he said, his voice measured. "But a wise man listens before he decides. You say love is stronger than division? That love is enough to mend what was broken. If that is true, then prove it." Nana Esi and ElIkem exchanged a glance, understanding the weight of what was being asked of them. This was not full acceptance, but it was a first step toward it. Nana Kwame Poku was not yet ready to bless their union, but he was willing to give them a chance, and for now, that was enough. As the morning sun climbed higher, spilling golden light into the hall, the path ahead remained uncertain, but Nana Esi and ElIkem stood together, ready to walk it, step by step, hand in hand. The night stretched deep and quiet over the family compound, the air thick with the scent of burning wood. In the distance, the rhythmic pulse of distant drums echoed through the village, weaving into the stillness like a forgotten memory. Inside her childhood room, Nana Esi slept peacefully, but outside, ElIkem stood restless, drawn by the cold embrace of the night. He walked into the courtyard, his thoughts a heavy burden upon his shoulders. He knew that any Nana Kwame Poku's approval would not be easy, but he was prepared to fight for it. As he leaned against a wooden pillar, seeking solace in the quiet, the soft rustle of fabric drew his attention. He turned to see Mami Akosua approaching her, her delicate hands steady as she carried a small clay pot of herbal tea. "Sleep does not find you tonight, ElIkem?" she asked softly. He straightened, bowing his head respectfully. "No, Mommy," my thoughts aloud. "There is much to consider." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, yet her gaze held something deeper, a recognition that unsettled him. She placed the clay pot on a small wooden stool and settled beside it, motioning for him to do the same. "You remind me of someone I once knew," she murmured, "someone I once loved." ElIkem's curiosity piqued. He waited, sensing that she was unraveling a story long buried. The lantern beside them flickered, casting shifting shadows on the walls, as if the past itself was awakening in the stillness of the night. "Someone from the past?" he asked gently. Mami Akosia nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of the clay pot. Her eyes, often filled with quiet sorrow, glistened with a memory long suppressed. "Before I was given to Nana Kwame Poku, I loved the man," she confessed. "He was ever like you. We met in secret, just as you and Nana Isi did. We whispered our dreams to the river, made promises under the same moon that watches over you now. But when my family discovered our love, they tore us apart. I was forced into this life, into this duty, but my heart never forgot him." ElIkem's breath caught. He had sensed the quiet sadness in her, but he had never imagined that their fates were so closely intertwined. A forbidden love from the past now mirrored in the present. "Do you know what became of him?" he asked. A single tear slipped down Mami Akosia's cheek, but she quickly wiped it away, shaking her head. "He left, disappeared from my life as if he had never been. Perhaps he too was forced to forget. Or perhaps he still remembers me as I remember him." The silence between them grew thick with unspoken words, the weight of history pressing down. ElIkem finally understood why she had accepted Nana Isi's choice more easily than the others, why she had looked at him not with suspicion but with familiarity. "Your love was never truly lost, Mami," he said gently. "It still lived on in Nana Isi, in her courage, in her defiance, in her heart." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time in many years, she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. She reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "Perhaps fate is kinder this time," she whispered. "Perhaps, through you and Isi, love will finally win." The night held its breath as their hands rested together. A love once stolen by tradition now found its way back, reborn in a new generation. The story had not ended. It had only just begun.